Henry and Laurie for their early comments. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you tonight. And if you find it worthwhile, you've got my daughter Erin, who's sitting over there, to thank for getting me here. And just to be clear, that is an unashamed Clark of a very proud father. I'll pay for that later. After your rich program of speakers this week, you don't need me to stand here and tell you how important Asia, and especially China, is to Australia. That's a given. It's why the Prime Minister has announced a white paper looking at Australia's engagement in Asia. It's a recognition that Australia needs to become more Asia literate, to better understand Asia in all its dimensions, political, economic, and cultural, and position our economy and society appropriately to respond to the challenges and opportunities that the Asian century will create. And China's role in that Asian century is central. Forums such as this one can make an important contribution, bringing together the people that are the future of the Australia-China bilateral relationship. We've already covered a wide range of issues, from the role of the Chinese diaspora to Australia's Indigenous challenge. I think that was a really good thing that you covered that. Our trade relationship, but importantly, you didn't stop at that. You discussed our creative industries from both countries, and of course, China's international role. What I want to do tonight is just focus, as you wrap up the 2011 Australia-China Youth Dialogue, on a few of the key challenges and opportunities that you will face as future leaders and drivers of our bilateral relationship. So this isn't about me and my generation. It's not even about Paul's generation. It's really about the generation of those who are coming behind us. So let me start with two key challenges for Australia. For the first time, Australia is in a situation where its major economic partner is someone different than its major strategic partner. What does this mean, and how do we respond to it? Second, how do we effectively manage the sheer scale of Australia's economic relationship with China? Now, our economic relationship with China is crucial to our future, but our strategic relationship with the United States is at the heart of our overall approach to foreign and security policy. How China and the United States interact with each other in the decades ahead is of fundamental importance to Australia and the region as a whole. As a significant regional economy and a strategically important country to both the United States and to China. And let's face it, Australia is a significant country in its own right. It's the 13th or 14th largest economy in the world. How Australia manages its bilateral relationships with these two world powers matters. It matters for us, it matters for them, and it matters for the other countries in the region. We have a strong complementary economic relationship with China, which benefits both our countries. Colleagues of mine like Jeff Brady, who's over here at the corner, have made huge and invaluable contributions to that over many, many years. What we need to do now is to continue to build on that relationship. In traditional sectors such as resources and energy, which have proved so profitable for Australia, in manufacturing, which has proved so profitable for China, but more importantly, in the new areas, in services, in agriculture. But we shouldn't just talk about trade. We should start to talk more about how we build our investment relationships in ways that ensure that we both prosper and grow as our economies develop further. But we also have to recognise that our different histories, our political systems, and indeed our strategic interests mean that there is potential tension that each country, the tension in the relationship, that each country will need to work at if we're to manage our relationship effectively. We have to recognise that there are some areas where we'll have to agree to disagree, while respecting each other's points of view. It's important, though, that we have systems in place to help minimise or address these tensions, to ensure they don't impinge on the development of our strong overall relationship. At a government level, we have a strong network of bilateral dialogues which provide opportunities for our two countries to engage on issues ranging from economic ties to climate change, defence relations to human rights. And as someone who's participated both in my previous role as Secretary of Department of Climate Change and in my role before that as Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, in a number of these dialogues in the economic and financial sphere and the climate change sphere, I understand just how productive and worthwhile they can be both for China and for Australia. To further these contacts, I'll be travelling to China myself next month to meet with a range of senior officials, business people and other experts. That's probably my 10th trip to China in the last decade. But broader people-to-people links are also crucial, and Australia needs to strengthen its China literacy in a literal sense as well as commercially and culturally. We need more people like you studying each other's languages, our histories and our culture, and more importantly still, developing friendships. Not just friendships that you make for this week, but friendships that will endure for years and decades ahead. But we need to go beyond just those of you in this room. We need to find ways where we can use less formal engagement between our two peoples, maybe through social media networks, blogs, whatever, but ways that help us to understand the issues that concern our respective populations. It's only by the people of each country knowing one another that we'll actually really be able to build and develop the relationship that will be so important for both of them. The strength of our trade relationship with China is itself another challenge for Australia. China's rise has been accompanied by a rapidly growing demand for Australia's energy and mineral resources. And growth in China's manufacturing sectors has led to an increased global supply of low-cost manufacturers. As a net exporter of resources and a net importer of manufacturers, Australia has benefited dramatically from China's development. We can see that when we talk about our terms of trade, which is simply the ratio of the price of our exports over the price of our imports. This is at record levels. And I should have brought along a chart to show you. This is not only at the highest level it's ever been, it's actually been sustained at this level for longer than has ever been the case. At one level, this is fantastic news for Australia. What it means, though, for some parts of our economy, is that they face very significant pressures to restructure. Our trade-exposed industries outside the resources and minerals, the resources and energy sector, are under great pressure. The high exchange rate, which is itself a reflection of the terms of trade, has undermined the competitiveness of parts of our economy, while the profitability of the resources and energy sectors is actually beating up the price of labour. A point was made earlier about cleaners in the northwest of Western Australia earning perhaps touch exaggerated, but somewhat close to what the Prime Minister is. I'm resisting the temptation to make a statement about the task the Prime Minister faces and the task take that as read. But as I've said elsewhere, it's as if we woke up one morning to find the world has made us richer. But to benefit from that opportunity the world has provided us, Australia has to accept that labour and capital will need to be deployed differently than has been the case in the past. What this means is that some sectors and some firms in our economy will have to grow more slowly so that the more productive parts can grow more rapidly. We need policy settings which facilitate such change rather than trying to impede them. We need policies that promote investment, innovation, education and schools. Policies which can increase our ability to innovate and capture new opportunities and which will deliver productivity gains we need to continue to lift our living standards. Given the volume of our bilateral trade, an issue that I've reflected on in other speeches and I must say in doing so has attracted a great deal of attention, is Australia's exposure to the risk of policy missteps or major economic fluctuations emerging from China. This is important, but as I've tried to emphasise elsewhere, There's nothing new in this. In the past, we've been reliant on markets in the United Kingdom, the US, or in Japan to the same extent, or indeed in the case of the UK, even more so than our reliance on the Chinese market. What's new is that unlike the situation China faces today, those countries were not themselves trying to undertake a massive economic transformation at the same time. And it's that massive structural transformation that opens up the risk of policy missteps. So it's the ambition of China's development and emergence that raises the probability of policy missteps. But policy missteps in China is not unique. It's not a uniquely Chinese phenomenon. For those in this room, perhaps I'll just point to Jeff and myself, who are old enough to remember the experience of the 80s and 90s, when Australia opened up its economy, when we broke down a lot of those command and control, those type features of our economy, we faced dramatic challenges of adjustment. And indeed, one could say that there were multiple missteps in policy during that period. What it means for Australia is not that we should wring our hands about the risk of policy missteps in China. We should work with our Chinese colleagues to help them ensure that they minimise that probability. But what we should be doing at home is ensuring that we have an economy that retains the flexibility to adjust to shocks. The sort of flexibility that's been a strong and defining feature of our economic performance in recent decades. A performance that saw us ride out the Asian financial crisis of the late 90s, the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s, and the global financial crisis, delivering you, the young Australians in this room, 2 decades of uninterrupted economic growth and a rise in living standards that probably will not be matched in our history. The fact that you've gone through 2 decades of uninterrupted economic growth is not an experience that any of your predecessors would have had. The flexibility of our currency, the independence of the Reserve Bank, a clear medium-term fiscal framework, and a strong and well-regulated financial sector, all of these are fundamental to Australia's ability to manage the impacts of external volatility. The right domestic policy settings in areas such as taxation and competition policy, water and energy pricing, labour and infrastructure are equally important. Together, these sorts of policy settings will help ensure that we're in a position to maximise the benefits to Australia from our relationship with China, including from the investment flows that are likely to both expand and diversify across many areas of our economy in the decades ahead. We have a strong relationship, but we must not be complacent about it. We need to be aware of the challenges the relationship presents for Australia and to think actively about how we should address these. And the Prime Minister's White Paper is a step in helping us do that. For China, the challenges are of course quite different, given both China's size and the stage of its economic development. 2 particular challenges I see are first, fulfilling the role not just of a responsible stakeholder in the international community, but of a major global power. And secondly, managing an increasingly complex economy to sustain growth, even as China's population ages. Excuse me. Greater economic weight brings with it greater strategic weight. China is widely expected to be the world's largest economy within the next decade, measured in purchasing power parity terms, and is increasingly perceived as a rising global superpower. The Pew Global Attitude Survey released in July shows that in 15 of the 22 nations surveyed, the balance of opinion is that China will, or already has, replaced the US as the world's leading superpower. This is a view that has increased substantially over the past 2 years. Whatever the truth of that perception, with greater prestige and influence comes greater responsibility and an expectation that China will contribute to the provision of global public goods and provide global economic leadership. China's emergence has benefited greatly from the existing rules-based multilateral economic, financial and trade system. the stability and further development of the world economy can only be net positive for China. China is a key member of the G20 and has had its representation on the IMF and World Bank increased to more closely align with its economic weight. However, greater representation in international fora does not guarantee greater effectiveness for those institutions. China will need to work constructively to help address major global challenges, including rebalancing global growth, addressing climate change, finding a way forward for global trade liberalisation, and indeed supporting efforts in Europe to address the sovereign debt crisis. By virtue of its sheer size, no major global public policy issue will be capable of resolution without China. But if China is not seen as engaging constructively on these issues, its interests will ultimately suffer. Now, while China looms large in absolute terms, it's still at a relatively early stage of development. GDP per capita in purchasing power parity terms is only 1/6 of US levels. Even by 2016, when the IMF expects China to exceed the US in terms of the size of its economy, its GDP per capita will still be less than 1/4 of that of the United States. China faces a daunting and complex domestic reform agenda as it shifts towards a more consumption-oriented economy, as it confronts issues like financial market reform and climate change policy. China is a stage of development where whole-of-economy reforms are more economically desirable and indeed, I would say, necessary than the isolated pilot-style reforms which it's used today. But whole-of-economy reforms require political will. Just like in Western democracies, China's leaders will need to tackle its stubborn vested interests. This alone is already a difficult task, yet it will also happen at a time when China's society is aging. China's latest census shows its population is growing more slowly than in the past, but with a sharp rise in those aged 65 and over. UN data projects the share of the working age population is 15 to 64, and the total population will start to fall from 2014. So while China will continue to benefit from freeing up relatively inefficient agricultural labour and moving into other parts of the economy, there will no longer be an impetus to growth, deriving purely from an expanding labour force. Beyond this reorientation of the existing workforce, China will need to increasingly rely on productivity to drive growth. Promoting technology innovation, industry upgrading, and competitiveness will help. Importantly, this requires better resource allocation and ultimately, I emphasise ultimately, a more market-driven exchange rate. That aside, it's worth noting that many of the challenges that China faces are also being grappled with by policymakers here and elsewhere. We're also anticipating the consequences of an ageing society, and we also face the need to improve our innovative capacity and productivity performance. So there's a common dimension to many of the challenges, and it serves everyone to recognise that, to discuss and debate openly what they are, but not only what those challenges are, also what are the opportunities. In a relationship growing as fast as that between China and Australia, there are of course a wealth of opportunities. China is Australia's largest two-way trading partner, with total two-way trade of over 100 million Australian dollars a year. The complementarity of our interests, particularly in resources, has long underpinned that relationship. But trade and services has become increasingly important and shows great potential, particularly given the growing middle class in China. China is Australia's largest source of foreign students, making up nearly 30% of all international students in Australia. And tourism from China has grown steadily to, in fact, displace all other markets as the largest source of inbound tourists in Australia last year. But other services, such as financial and professional services and mining services, have considerable potential for increased cooperation. Australia is well positioned to meet other demands of an increasingly affluent society, for example in food and beverages, dairy, high quality meats, and of course our fantastic wines, which I hope you will take an opportunity to sample at length in the week you've been here. There's also a great deal of potential in our bilateral investment relationship. Clearly I've hit a chord. Perhaps this is an issue we can explore in the Q&A a bit more. There's also a great deal of potential in our bilateral investment relationship. But contrary to what some believe, Australia very much welcomes investment by Chinese companies. And that's demonstrated by the fact that between 2007-8 and 2009-10, the government approved over $50 billion of Chinese investment in Australia. There is nothing in our foreign investment arrangements which is anti-Chinese. It treats all comers equally. What it does is distinguish between the types of investments, not who the investor is. I should say, not which country the investor is, which is probably more applicable. But while Chinese investment in Australia has increased considerably, it's starting from a very low base. At the end of last year, China was our 12th largest investor. However, it still has less than 1% of its total stock of foreign investment in Australia. Compare that to the US at 28%, the UK at 24%, and even Japan at 6%. So there's a lot of opportunity for China-Australia investment. But I'd also emphasise investment's a two-way street. World-class Australian companies also want to invest in China, and we'd like to see greater opportunities opened up for them as well. Of course, we're not alone in seeking to increase and broaden our bilateral ties with China. The rest of the world is doing the same. The Shanghai World Expo last year was the largest ever held, demonstrating the extent of global interest in China. This means Australia cannot take the relationship for granted. We need to continue to work to strengthen and expand our ties. While capitalising on a complementary trade investment relationship and our position in the Asia-Pacific region, Australia must also boost our engagement in other areas, further strengthening our people-to-people links and improving our understanding of Chinese language, culture and history. The transformation of the global economy that's currently underway will help define the Asian century. And as we stand at it close to its start, the opportunities and challenges it presents will be a constant of your working life. I hope that you've found the dialogue to be productive and interesting. Perhaps it's even challenged you to think about our two countries in new ways or from different perspectives. For my part, I hope the dialogue continues and I hope it develops and continues to make an ongoing contribution to Australia-China relations.